Hello, everyone, and welcome, welcome. Welcome to this session where we call the webinar. It's a webinar on decolonizing the university, and not just that, but actually also sort of touching on the questions such as why and how do you go about decolonizing the university. There's been a lot of talk within the sector and the wider community around decolonizing so many different things. So how about we start with talking about a subject around decoloniality in itself and within the context of what it really means. But before we do go into that, just a little bit of introduction of um, speakers here today. So Linda, it's really good to have you. It's not only a pleasure, it's an honor to have you and engage in this with you. So if you could maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, the work that you've been doing, your career, and your background really. We can start from there.
Okay, thanks, Emmanuel, and actually, thanks so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. I think the work that the Student Union does is amazing, and it's been so exciting to be part of some of the projects. So I'm a social work lecturer in the School of Applied Social Studies at RGU, and I've been here since 2015. People might realize from my accent that I'm not Scottish. I actually come from South Africa, and that's where I did my social work education and practiced as a social worker, doing a lot of community work especially, but then also from 2000 working at a university. And so, of course, since Black Lives Matter especially, there's been a lot of interest in anti-racism, and it spilled over into anti-racism in higher education and the very important area of decolonization. So the reason I mentioned South Africa is because having worked in South Africa and grown up there all my life, the double problems that many countries have around either the historical background of slavery and colonization, or like in South Africa, apartheid, has really led those countries to grapple a lot with these kinds of issues. And so my work naturally also related to issues of decolonization. So from a research point of view, this has been an area that I've been working in, working with people in higher education around looking at issues of decolonization. There's a lot that I'm hoping we'll be able to talk about today. I have to just say that I think that who leads decolonization is really important. I know I'm getting into the topic now, but I just want to say this as I introduce myself. Who leads processes of decolonization is important. And I'm very aware that I'm speaking to you as a white, privileged South African that shouldn't be taking any kind of a lead in these kinds of dynamics. It's important that if someone like myself is interested and involved, it should always be collaboratively and from an allyship point of view, because there are lots of parallels between anti-racism and decolonization. So I just put that out there a little bit. But yeah, so I am busy in a number of research projects at the moment and very relieved that term's coming to an end, although as the students finish up, we sit with all the markings. So I have a good, interesting month or two ahead of me. But anyway, summer's coming and hopefully COVID's departing. So all should be better. Thanks.
Very nice. I'm not exactly sure. I can hear a bit of an echo. So just to put this caveat out there, apologies if you can't hear me or for one reason or the other, I might be having technical issues. It's just in the day and age that we find ourselves. There's a lot of positives to draw out of it, because we can easily have such wonderful and organic discussions like this due to the advantage of having technology, but also technology has its own perks. So I offer my apologies ahead. also, like Linda, I am also a co-speaker of this sort of discussion, but also not just a speaker, but also playing a dual role of actually hosting as well. So, but it's not just myself and Linda that doing this alone. We also have you as the member of audience, and we hope that throughout you'd be engaging with us in the comment section. So please, by all means, if I go into introducing myself, please, by all means, let us know your thoughts, comments, feedback, ideas, any questions that you may have, and please do not hesitate. Please use the comment chat box, and we'll try as much as possible to engage with you and answer them as we go along. We also have a member of the RGU Union team helping us in the background with a bit of the technical stuff. We'll have a presentation come up at some point, and if it's me speaking or if it's Linda speaking, you'd hear us say next. But it's actually to give a cue to our technical director in the background to be able to help us move the slides, because we're not moving it ourselves. And yeah, a little bit about myself. My name is Emmanuel Akerele, and I'm the Student Union President for Education and Welfare, RGU Union. I am a Nigerian, and most of my background, history, birth, everything has come from Nigeria up until this very moment. And I've lived in Aberdeen for close to about 4 years now. And in that period, I came in for my master's degree, but I've also served in several key student lead representative positions, ranging from class rep to a vice president in the student union for communities, and now president for education and welfare. I'm also very much particular and passionate about equality, diversity, and inclusion in general. And I'm also a founding member of the Student Black Liberation Network at RGU, which is a group of students coming together to take a active stand against racism. Just the final part to plug in here before I move on to the most important discussion of the day is that I also do some really nice work within the sector and different bodies in terms of furthering the cause of anything around social justice and race equality. So I work with Advanced HE, and I also volunteer with Scottish Student Sports as an ethnicity lead for the equality work that they are doing. And without wasting much more time, I think a good place to start this discussion is to start by talking about the background of what we're talking about. What is decoloniality? What does it even mean? What does it stand for? How do we even define it? Because so far, I'm sure there's still a lot of people who have a lot of questions around the concept of decoloniality and what does it mean? How is it important? Why is it important? So now I'll hand over to Linda to kickstart for us. So Linda, over to you.
Thank you. Just one quickly little bit that I want to add. I just want to say that I'm part of the Race Equality Network at RGU. That was an important point I wanted to make. And that's also one of the ways that we've been doing work with you. And then also, just while I'm here, I'm part of the Social Work Action Network, which is a worldwide radical social work network that started in the UK, but it's a really exciting place to be involved in. But to get to decoloniality, and I just want to say that decoloniality has become quite a fashionable topic, and we need to be careful that we don't see decolonization or decoloniality. I'll talk quickly later about what those differences might be. It can be a very fashionable topic to think that we're going to bring about a lot of change. It's actually the other way around. Thanks for putting the slides up. Hold on with this slide because I think that picture is significant. If we work for social change and the things that Emmanuel was speaking about, social justice and real transformation in society, then decolonization or decoloniality needs to be part of that. We can't expect to bring about total change and transformation only by working on decolonization, but it has a really important place. So if you could just go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So the picture on the previous slide was a famous painting. It's the one that gets pushed down everyone's throats in South Africa about when South Africa was discovered by the European conquerors, as if it didn't have ancient societies living there already. So I like to use that picture. But as I said, decoloniality is just a part in the way that we achieve a socially just world. Could you change the slide, please? Next. So I'm not going to be speaking to a presentation the whole time. Emmanuel and I are both going to be speaking to some of the slides, but I just wanted to run through what some of the main points are. So we are going to talk about coloniality or colonization and what that means for today in terms of the post-colonial context. We're going to see how colonization or coloniality is ongoing, and that's the reason why we need decoloniality. Not because we're trying to dig up old things from the past, it's understanding that coloniality is ongoing. We will talk a little bit about what should decoloniality be aiming to achieve and how could the university work towards decoloniality. And we're hoping that that will be part of the conversation that people engage with, where we share ideas around this. Next slide, please. Thanks. Emmanuel, is it okay if I go on? And then we could maybe start a little bit with this? Okay. So to begin with, then, what is colonization? You will have heard that these words get used interchangeably. Colonization was the geopolitical, the place and the political and the time period when one country oppressed and dominated another country through military and economic and cultural oppression. It's really important that we see that as part of colonization. It was rooted in mercantile capitalism. It wasn't only just to bring about civilization to the rest of the world, as is claimed. Then already the motives were very strongly about resources, about exploitation and extraction of resources. And it was the early stages of capitalism. And so colonization as a period was a very lethal, toxic time in the world where, because of military superiority, certain European powers were able to oppress other countries. Could you go on to the next slide, please? This is just an indication of all the different areas of the world, all of those colored in other than light gray, that were colonized by European countries. So you can see the extent of that. We don't need to go into it, but it's an interesting depiction. Next slide, please. And so because we are in the UK, acknowledging that the other countries that also colonized the world, let's look briefly at what Britain's role was. So we know that modern colonialism began in the 15th century already, and mainly the countries were Portugal, Spain, Britain, and Holland, the Netherlands. And then, for example, when it came to Africa in 1885, there was a conference in Berlin, and the European powers decided who would take ownership of which countries. But needless to say, the British Empire at its height was the largest empire in history. And by 1913, it rules over 412 million people, or 23% of the world's population. And then, of course, we know about the slave trade history, or should I say, we don't know much, as we should, of the slave trade history. It was largely hidden in British education. That is changing quite a lot nowadays, thanks largely to many of the activist processes that have been happening in recent years. British colonialism and other colonialisms were described as the good that was done to civilize a barbaric and so-called uncivilized world. Next slide, please. And these are the countries that were colonized by Britain. You can see the extent of that. One of the ambitions of Cecil Rhodes was to produce a corridor of red from the southern tip of Africa through to the north. And overall, it was just about achieved. Next slide, please. And so then what do we mean by the post-colonial context? Post-colonial is not talking about after colonialism. It's talking about the period after colonialism, but the impact of what colonialism did into the period after colonialism. It's about those ongoing dynamics that were set in place during colonization already. The key point here is that it was about power. It's those long-standing patterns of power that got put in place by colonialism. And it plays out today in the economic and the military power relationships that still exist. We know about the military power of certain countries. We know about how the economy of the world, how the global economy works. But importantly, and this is where it comes closer to us as universities, these patterns also dictate and define knowledge production, culture, labor, and relationships between peoples and societies. So anti-colonial theorists talk about the matrix of power and how those are reproduced and reproduce colonial domination and ongoing Eurocentrism, this idea that anything from Europe is what is universal and important. I don't know, Emmanuel, if you think we should stop there for a moment or should we go on a little bit longer? I don't want it to be this boring me presenting and everyone else listening.
I think so far we're doing really good.
Okay.
What I think we should do at this point is to I just want to quickly remind everyone watching that what we're trying to do is to build step by step the genealogy of the discussion. It's starting from, as opposed to just going directly into decoloniality and just talking about what it's about, but sort of building a bit of context around it first of all, and that's what Linda started. So just to say again, if you have any questions or comments or feedback so far, just please feel free to let us know in the comment section, and we would of course engage as we go along. But I think we're coming. We've talked about the coloniality aspect of it, and it's more now trying to go into decoloniality and what it means. And because the purpose of today's session is to be able to dissect, one, decoloniality, what it means, what it really means, and then secondly is why should the concept of decoloniality be adapted into higher education? What role would it play? What purpose would it serve? And not just why, but also even when we know why, how do we go about doing this? So these are the core aspects we're hopefully trying to touch on and address in this session. So Linda, if you just continue and then breathe into decoloniality, then we'll pick up from there.
Great. So next slide, please. So still stopping for a moment with coloniality, because as I point these things out, you're going to begin to see what it is that needs to change, which is really about decoloniality. So we know that colonialism had a brutal impact on so many different levels. And from a psychological point of view, collectively, this was an historical trauma. And we know that intergenerationally, trauma gets passed on. So the experiences that people had in the 18 and early 1900s through colonialism continues through the way that families were subjected to those kinds of oppressions. We need to remember that European culture, language, and ways of doing things were seen as being the ultimate good. All other races and cultures were seen as inferior and uncivilized. In colonial contexts, children were forced to learn English or Dutch or whatever the language was. If they spoke home languages, they were regarded as being uncivilized. They were even punished for that. And so peoples of the colonies, and yes, we're not talking about within Britain, but we're talking for a moment about what was going on in colonies. Those people were exploited and oppressed through what is known as coloniality of power. There was immense power in oppressing those whole societies. But secondly, people's minds were colonized. As people were dehumanized and made to feel inferior and racially inferiorized, this was called coloniality of being. People's very identities were inferiorized. And there's some authors that have written so eloquently about this, including Frans Fanon, who has written books like Black Skin, White Masks, The Wretched of the Earth. He was an Algerian psychiatrist who came from Martinique and was one of the first really important anti-colonial theorists. But this isn't a theory lecture. Let me go on. The third area of coloniality is, and this is where we come in, knowledge, culture, and history was destroyed, suppressed, banned, so to speak. What was taught throughout was the histories of the European powers. And so epistemic coloniality is what we grapple with today. We're not only in those colonial contexts, but in the very countries that were doing the colonizing, only their own histories from a Western perspective, only their own cultures were regarded as supreme and universal and the good for the whole world. Next slide, please. And this is the last one on coloniality. So to delve a little bit more into what is then this colonization of being or of the mind, it's important to remember that race became a category that put people into subservient classes. Race is not a biological category. It was used, especially in slavery and colonial contexts, to make people be forced into those positions of being inferior. So people were objectified. Amy César, another anti-colonial theorist who was actually Fanon's teacher, speaks of this kind of dehumanization as thingification, where people are turned into objects as if they're not human beings. But then what happened because of those processes is that people began to internalize those kinds of messages and began to feel inferior. And so then people coming into these contexts of colonial power, this is what Fanon experienced when he went to France, feeling as if he didn't belong, he didn't fit in, that he was inferior, that his own culture that he was bringing from Martinique was somehow not good enough. And so that is called intrapsychic violence. It's a psychological trauma that people experience. Next slide. I think I'm going to skim over this because I've actually said quite a lot here. We need to remember that Western paradigms of philosophy are assumed to be the only. As students here or as academics here, we know that the textbooks that we use here in Britain, that we use in post-colonial contexts, are written by the Western theorists, the historical theorists whose work was regarded as the only truth. European whiteness became what was normal, and everything else was seen as the other. And so these attitudes and ideologies have become institutionalized in the global university system. And that's where decolonizing of the university comes in. Next slide, please. So, decolonization is a process of, and some of this is just my talking, some of this is based on a lot of other theorists, and a lot of decolonization is also what people that are experiencing this process need to define and work out for themselves. But it should be about broad transformation at all levels. I know Emmanuel's got something to say about that because we've chatted. Power relationships and knowledge needs to be transformed. But we need to remember that we can never achieve decolonization if it isn't also at a material level, where inequalities are dealt with, where these power dynamics that make some people have access to certain resources and others have or have not access to those resources, that discrimination is eliminated. So it can be a very, very broad concept. So it's important that we find our place in what we mean at university level, bearing in mind that it's part of a bigger process. Next slide, please. And then we'll stop. Just go on with that slide. That was a social work knowledge and theory slide that I have found useful, that looks at knowledge, and it can apply to all kinds of knowledge, that on the one hand is oppressive and domesticating, colonizing, through to transformative and decolonizing. And we need to look at knowledges that we're engaging with. Where do they fit in on this continuum? Next slide, please. I feel like I'm conducting an orchestra. Thanks, Ross, for doing this so efficiently. So I think we should stop here because there's only one other slide, and the next slide is about how do we go about things. But I think this is where the conversation needs to happen between Emmanuel and myself, and comments from people that might want to make them. So then, decolonization of the university to achieve decoloniality. Decoloniality is something we work towards. Decolonization is the process. So you'll see the first point there is exposing institutionalized racism. So we come back full circle to what's going on at the moment and the new structures that have been formed, like the Black Liberation Network that students formed in last year. Already, students especially have been driving this beginning phases of decolonization in the university. Emmanuel, does that make sense to you? What are your thoughts so far?
Most definitely. I think, in my opinion, the first step around decolonization of the university, as it is rightly put, exposing institutional racism and all forms of all social injustices. Just by the virtue of the work that's been done. For example, last year we had Black History Month, celebrating cultural diversity and as well as raising awareness of social issues like racism, for example. Not just at RGU, but across the whole higher education sector. And you can see how, students are driving the cause and making sure these causes are actually heard, spoken about, and actioned. And I think it's very, very key. Just permit me to make a very, very good example of some of the practices at RGU, for example, is we having report and support as a platform where we encourage, individuals who have suffered some form of, injustice to be able to speak up, speak out, and get the support that they need. And having such platform extended to issues surrounding topics around like microaggressions, hate crime or bullying and harassment, it's a very huge step in the right direction, if you ask me, because the first thing you want to do is to create an environment where there is enough equality and sense of tolerance and respect, especially amongst people, regardless of gender, race, how you look or how you do not look. And I think creating that environment, such enabling environment, is the first step in the right direction. That's why for me, for example, I think decoloniality should encompass in the higher education sector, should encompass beyond just what's being studied in the classrooms, beyond the curriculum. Of course, these are very core parts of the argument. It's important to be able to open up what the curriculum to an equal level of research. For example, having proper representation of authors or academics or works that have been done in the past that is by members of the BAME community. Apologies for using that term. I know there's a lot of questions around it, but just bear with me for now. I believe that the curriculum should accommodate the wider knowledge of the world and not disperse some knowledge or not close the access to some form of knowledge because they don't fall within the category of superiority, for example. Because I believe there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn in terms of medicine, for example. There's a lot to learn from African medicine. There's a lot to learn from Asian kinds of medicine, and not just dispose them off and see them as not good enough of certain standard because they're not Western. And I think it's very, very much beneficial to everyone in general if there's, of course, that diversity and equal access in terms of the curriculum. But then for me, I think it goes beyond just the curriculum. It goes to the wider university. It goes to, decolonizing even up until the level of the cafeteria, for example, or sports. I'll share my personal experience. I love football. I sleep football. I eat football. I wake up football. I'm a Real Madrid supporter. I like Cristiano Ronaldo. And I would play football every hour of the day if I'm able to do it. But I remember coming to uni and I thought, oh, I want to join the football team, but I never really got encouraged enough because I just felt like maybe I wouldn't be accepted, maybe I'm not good enough, but I'm actually really good, you know. And it's having an understanding of or opening up that access to individuals to be able to understand that look, you have equal opportunity to partake in sports. If you want to play football, you have an equal opportunity, and it's not just by saying it, but actually making that process accessible. But just one quick caveat before I hand over back to Linda to say that although I've spoken a bit about diversity, equality, inclusion in terms of decoloniality, I just want to strongly stress that decoloniality is not just about diversity. It's not just about diversifying the curriculum or the system. It's not just about that. It deals with respect. It deals with equality. It deals with equal access. For example, there's so many aspects to decoloniality, so I don't want to overshadow it by just talking about cultural diversity. Back to you, Linda. But before I go back to Linda, I think one part to incorporate into the discussion is it'd be really good to hear, from everyone watching, your thoughts or your comments or any questions that you may have so far around decoloniality. What part you feel that is unclear? Sorry, back to you, Linda.
Thanks. Ross, could you put the slides up again? I just want to touch on one or two more points there. Thanks, Emmanuel. I like the point about it's not just about diversity. There's a risk there as well when it comes to anti-racism work that multiculturalism is seen as the answer or cultural competence. It's not about that. It goes much deeper to those power relationships and hierarchies. I just want to touch on one or two of these areas here when it comes to how do we go about uncovering and exposing and becoming conscious of the areas that need change? Because unless we do that, we can't change them. We have to ask ourselves, for example, what histories are we being taught or teaching? Whose stories are being told? When it comes to the histories of various processes of knowledge or disciplines, whose stories are being told? Is it only a very localized story, as if something along those lines didn't occur in other areas of the world? Is it the true history? Or are certain people foregrounded as if they are the fathers or mothers of certain inventions or certain scientific discoveries? There's a lot of contestation to be made around those histories. We need to be critical about them. We need to think about iconography, and that would mean pictures that are used, statues that are displayed, names of places, honoring certain role players who perhaps shouldn't be honored in that way. That's an area that has become really important. People know about the Rhodes Must Fall movement that actually started in South Africa and also played out here at Oxford. And there have been really important symbolic decommissioning of certain images and icons that have been questioned and exposed. I'm not going to go through each of these. People might want to notice some of them. An important point, I do think, is uncovering the ideologies behind the knowledges and theory. We can never be at a university and not encourage critical engagement and trying to uncover what ideological position is actually playing out in this bit of knowledge. Like I've said, we do need to also include academic resources from other contexts. And finally, sorry, yes.
No, I was just going to, just because you mentioned academic, references there, just to quickly mention that there's really good work going on within, the sector in terms of like different sector bodies. Advanced HE, for example, has got a race equality charter, and they're doing excellent work with regards to the anti-racist curriculum project that's currently going on that touches on anti-racism and decolonizing the curriculum and the university environment as is. There's also really good work going with Sports Scotland, for example. I have a question, and Linda, just to get your opinion on this. There's also been some questions around, the purpose of taking the knee and the importance of it, or if it's enough to make any change. I've got my personal opinion, but just to hear your view, and a quick context to this would be football, for example. I'm going back to football now, I know, but the games in the English Premier League, for example, would have players taking the knee, and some people said, no, I'm not going to take the knee, and what's what significance does it play? Is it enough as well? Is it enough to go in the right direction?
I mean, I think it happens at so many different levels, and I don't think it can ever be enough, but I think symbolically it's very powerful. So people might say, for example, and I take it back to the image of a statue or of a building's name, on its own, it doesn't mean anything to the building itself or to what happens inside the building. If terrible racist practices are still happening inside the building and the building gets renamed, doesn't achieve anything. But symbolically, for the people who it offends, and to acknowledge the change that has to happen, these kinds of things do need to, I think that they are very valuable. The problem is, and like in the beginning, when I said I'm white and privileged, people often do that to perform an action as if that in itself is enough. So me saying I see myself as a privileged white person, if it just stops there, it means nothing. I have to then make sure that I'm staying true to myself in how I behave towards other people and don't use and abuse my power that I have that comes from that position that I'm in. So if someone takes the knee, I think if they are also living those ideals and commitments at other areas of their lives, it's very, very powerful. That's my view.
Uh, I,
Yeah.
I share your view as well, but just up to a certain extent because I sorry, just to go off track a little bit. We'll come back in just a sec. Um, I did my undergrad. I wrote my thesis on, the language that's used in terms of tackling racism in football, in European football actually. And I did a lot of work around, the message around no to racism, kick racism out of football, the semiotics of it, the semantics of it, the pictorial evidence, the visuals that was used, the wordings, and all of that. And it's not a long time, but it's a while ago. And we're still talking about this same topic now. Um, Although I recognize the power and the importance of this period, and my personal opinion is there's still a lot of work that still needs to be done for it to be actualized. And if it can be actualized, I want to remain very optimistic about that. But I don't want to go too high away from the topic.
I think we completely agree because if it's not with action, it doesn't mean anything. Yeah. So I just want to make a final point. No one is saying that through decoloniality, everything that is European and Western must be thrown out the window. No. It's saying let's be critical about these things. Let's completely shake up the system to be able to expand it into a transformed new creature and then embrace what is valuable from these different systems, and so Western knowledges don't need to be rejected, but they must be contextualized. Emmanuel, I've got a couple more questions for you, and maybe we could change to the last slide because I think the questions fit well with what this part is about. And that relates to how one goes about. And can I just also say, what we're doing today is a tiny beginning of a process like this. No one's claiming that in 1 hour one can talk about all these issues, but I think one has to start somewhere. And so maybe, Emmanuel, if you can comment on the idea of how important it is that there be co-creation of curricula. So besides needing to activate the process, what would you say about the importance of inclusion of students with educators in looking at these issues?
Thank you very much. I think really you've we've talked a little bit about it in the beginning, but just to touch on one tiny bit before I go ahead from what you said just now is, of course, this is just a very, very, very tiny part of the process. Um, um, Difficult conversations must be had before action, any actionable cause can be seen. We have to talk about these difficult things and put the conversation, put the discussion, and on the table and allow everyone contribute in their own opinions and in their own way. And I think that's why we've tried and structure this session in a way where we're hoping that comments, feedback, questions around the topic would come up. But to go a little bit into the role of co-creation, I think co-creation is very, very, very important. And it's not just about decolonizing the curriculum or the university alone, but in almost everything, because engaging students as partners, active partners, if I may say, is very, very important in shaping the learning experience and the wider learning experience of students. Because very important to admit this part, that whether you like it or not, students are experts at being students. They're not experts at a lot of things, but you see, at being students, students are experts at being students. If someone was a student in 2019, they are not an expert at being a student in 2021 if they are no longer a student. Only that person or that individual who is still a student in 2021 can tell you exactly what it feels like to be a student, having to write the assessments, attend classes, and do all the other things that involve being a student while in a global pandemic. So engaging experts and finding out from them, and being in that process to say, get your thoughts. What do you think? How do we go about this? Being involved in this process is very, very important. And in mapping out how decoloniality, for example, can be achieved, it's important to not only leave this, I mean, in terms of the higher education sector, to not only leave this to, staff, academic staff, support staff, or senior management, but actually also engaging students. And when I say students, I don't only mean, student representatives like myself or the student union alone. I mean also the wider student body, in all of the different possible strands of work. It could be in representation, it could be in sort of research work as to what's going on and how to tackle it. It could be, in when I go say research, for example, focus groups, for example, could involve students, and also in the discussion in itself, engaging the actual students who are day-to-day students and actual learners in this time, to be able to share their experiences and talk about, why this topic of decoloniality and the process of decolonization would be important and germane to their own personal learning experience. In some way, just add a caveat that, somehow that's being done with some form of initiatives, but we have to review and think about how we go about it again, so the access is even more wider. I'll give an example. It might be a very terrible example, but the student Erasmus student exchange program, for example, is a good way to allow, UK students to be able to learn of other cultures and understand how things are done elsewhere, and be able to see, the world outside of what is just being represented in the media, for example, and be able to appreciate these other things of the world, which may also bump up, that level of equality and access and respect and tolerance between individuals. But then I still think that still has to be widened, beyond just, being a UK student and having an exchange program in Canada, for example, or very, very close by, but also looking beyond borders, if you see what I mean. I think that they say traveling is a part of education. That part of it affords, the quality of students, the quality of graduates that are coming out of the UK education sector. I hope I'm making sense with the point that I've just made. Maybe I don't know. Have I answered your question, Linda?
Yes, no, I mean, definitely. It's you're pointing to the fact that it's really important to broaden it out as much as possible. And all of those kinds of activities and experiences bring about re-looking at the curriculum and new ideas being valued and regarded as important. Um,
I,
I mean, mhm.
no, on you go.
I've got a small example as well that's currently happening in the School of Applied Social Studies in social work. Some of the students that have been part of the formation of the Black Liberation Network, Emmanuel, you'll know, um, there's been an initiative in our school between staff and students, and we're busy with a research project of students who are racialized as Black and persons of color in social work, around the experiences of race and racism in social work. But what's interesting, why I'm mentioning it, is that the way that the research team has been put together is that it's student-led, that staff members are on that team, but we play equal roles there. And when it comes, for example, to students being interviewed for the research, we've put the names of every member of the research team, and we're asking that the participants in the study choose who they want must interview them. Now, that's a way of breaking down power relationships, because if someone doesn't want to be interviewed by a lecturer because there are those unequal power dynamics, or by a white person, they can say, I want to be interviewed by that person. That's a small example of changing the dynamics in research relationships, for example, that pays attention to dynamics of coloniality, because actually those kinds of power imbalances are characteristic of what coloniality is all about. So there are ways, it might be small, but there are ways that these things can be challenged.
I very much agree with you there, Linda. Um, I think the one part I would also like to stress alongside what you just said is the it's important for us to see not see. I mean, not it's important that we don't look at decoloniality independently as on its own, just in line with the work of the Quality Assurance Agency and Advanced HE Scotland. Decoloniality and decolonizing the curriculum and the university is part of a process of enhancement. If you look at the enhancement theme, for example, in RGU or even across most universities, it's around emerging stronger from, this current pandemic situation. But it's not just that; it's also relating to everything that's happened in the last 1, 2, 3 years and emerging stronger from that. For example, we had a global um, issue in relation to the death of George Floyd. And part of the enhancement theme is looking at how do we enhance our communities to be more equal, to have more tolerance, to have more diversity and inclusion, to be more inclusive, between ourselves. So decoloniality is as much as is a stand on its own, it's a part of a wider project of enhancement. And I think that's the way to look at it. Whether you like or not enhancement, everyone must continue to strive to get better. Be you an individual, a business, a group, or institution, or even a government. There's always room for improvement, and that's why the work of enhancement is very, very important. I know that we're a bit pressed for time, and Linda, I'll come to you in a second to ask for a final word. And that final word, I would like for us to be able to, sort of engage our audience in, where these thoughts should be leading next. But like you earlier mentioned, this discussion is a very, very, very tiny bit. An hour is not enough to carry the discussion, forward in a way. But we are hoping that it's a step in the very, very right direction. It's a tiny step in the right direction, and hopefully in the very near future, it's going to yield, results. So please keep an eye out for updates with links, very, very relevant links to some of the sector work and strands that are happening within the Scottish higher education sector. These will be coming up on the RGU Union website under the Black Liberation Network landing page. And also to highlight that, today's episode of this is as also is a celebration to me of what partnership means at RGU. It's an evidence of the work of partnership, being able to see students and staff come together to talk about enhancement opportunities. And I call it opportunity because I see it as an opportunity for us to continue to develop the higher education offering as it currently is, and continue to stay ahead of the global higher education offering. I mean the UK and Scotland in general. So, but back to you now, Linda. What should be what should we be looking forward to? What as you know, if a person that's listening to us talk about decoloniality, what would you be asking them to take away from this session?
Thanks so much, and I've just loved this conversation, Emmanuel. I hope that there are going to be lots more around these kinds of issues. For me, it's about being critical. It's about looking at everything that we engage with through the lenses of what's going on here, what needs to be different, what can be put in place that can bring about change. So I would hope that people do begin to feel critical and inspired, and that they would get involved in whatever opportunities there are for further discussions and possibly forming some kind of a work group. I don't know. I think that the work that the Student Union does is so excellent that things do happen and things do get organized. I would just make a plea that people respond to whatever the plans are that get put in place.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. In light of what you just said, I'll just plug this in as well, that we have the Black Liberation Network, which is a group of students, coming together to take an active stand against racism. To join the BLN is simple, straightforward. You can just check on the RGU_BLN on Instagram, and check their page on Facebook as well for more information. It's there's no membership fee, there's nothing, it's just you just follow a link, and then you get introduced into the BLN community and sort of engage in the work that they're doing. But it's been a brilliant discussion so far, and I've enjoyed every bit of it. Linda, thank you so much for doing this with me. Thank you so much for making out the time to sort of talk about, decoloniality and its importance in carrying on towards enhancement, first of all, and then also how to go about it. But I really also enjoyed the breakdown you did of the genealogy of how, the role that coloniality has played in history, and why it is important that now we should be casting our minds around decoloniality, around equality, around diversity, inclusion, and access. And I think I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot, very, very much. But I'm also hoping, and I hope everyone watching would agree with me that, although we say this is a tiny bit step in the right direction, that we would also be able to have even more series of webinars / sessions / events like this going forward, and may not necessarily be me or you be able to have even a wider discussion amongst members within our immediate community at RGU. Any final words from yourself, Linda? For me, that's it, and I'm ready to say my goodbyes. But any final words from yourself?
A small thing, there might be some colleagues watching from the university as well. Please, if I could put in a bit, the Race Equality Network is engaged in really important work, and we've revitalized, and we really are excited about the work we're doing. So just to encourage people to be involved with that. And Emmanuel, I hope that the continued partnership there will get stronger and stronger between yourselves and us.
Thank you very much, Linda. For me, it's goodbye. Thank you so much for making out the time to attend. For everyone who's watched and everyone who will be watching afterwards, because this video will still be readily available on the RGU Union social media pages. So to everyone who's watching, thank you so much for taking out the time in your evening to engage with us this evening, and hopefully we hope to see more of you in some of the future events that we'll be putting across. So thank you so much, and goodbye.